They wanted a new world. They wanted freedom from the iron grip of Rome. The rain turned the forest floor to mud. The wind screamed through the pines, drowning out the orders of the centurions. In the narrow defile, the Roman column stretched for miles, a serpent unable to move, unable to fight, unable to escape the arrows falling from the darkness of the trees. Men stumbled, horses screamed. The disciplined legions of Augustus, the most powerful army the world had ever known, were disintegrating into a slaughterhouse of mud and blood. This was not a battle, this was an annihilation, and for the man who orchestrated it, it was only the beginning. This is the story of Arminius, the story of a betrayal that shook an empire to its foundations, the story of the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. In the autumn of 9 AD, the Roman Empire was at the height of its power. Emperor Augustus, the adopted son of the deified Julius Caesar, ruled a domain that stretched from the sands of Egypt to the mists of Britannia. For decades, his armies had pushed the frontier eastward, across the Rhine River, into the dense, dark forests of Germania. The Romans called this land Germania Magna. They saw it not as a nation, for the Germanic tribes were a collection of fiercely independent clans, the Cherusci, the Marsi, the Chatti, the Bructeri, but as a problem to be solved. By 7 AD, the conquest seemed nearly complete. Roman forts dotted the landscape. New towns like Valdgirmes were rising. Tribal chieftains were sending their sons to Rome as hostages, a guarantee of loyalty. To oversee this new province, Augustus sent a trusted aristocrat, Publius Quinctilius Varus. Varus was a man of the old nobility. He had served as governor of Syria, where he had earned a reputation for ruthlessness and efficiency. But he did not understand the Germans. He treated them like subjects, imposing Roman taxes, Roman law, Roman justice, without comprehending the seething resentment he was cultivating. He assumed the tribes were pacified. He was dangerously wrong. Among the Cherusci chieftains, there was a young man who watched Varus with cold calculation. His name was Arminius, but Arminius was no ordinary barbarian. As a boy, he had been taken to Rome as a hostage. He had been educated in the ways of the empire. He had learned Latin, mastered the art of war, and risen to the rank of eque, a Roman knight commanding an auxiliary cohort in the Roman army. He had seen the might of Rome from the inside. He had studied its tactics, its strategies, its weaknesses, and he had made a decision. He would use the Romans' own weapons against them. For years, Arminius played the perfect ally. He dined with Varus. He advised him on tribal politics. He lulled the governor into a false sense of security. Meanwhile, in secret, he traveled from village to village, whispering rebellion. He told the chiefs of the Cherusci, the Marsi and the Bructeri that the time had come to strike, before their sons were lost to Rome forever, before their gods were replaced by the cold logic of the Forum. The trap was set. All it needed was bait. In the autumn of 9 AD, Varus was preparing to march his 3 legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, back to their winter quarters on the Rhine. It was a routine movement. The army, nearly 20,000 men, including auxiliaries and camp followers, stretched out in a long, vulnerable column. They brought their wives, their children, their traders. They brought their confidence. Then came the message. A local tribe was in revolt. Arminius, standing at Varus's side, urged him to take a detour to crush the uprising before winter set in. It was, he insisted, a short march. Varus trusted him. He ordered the legions to march east into the heart of the Teutoburg Forest. The column moved along a narrow, muddy track. To the north, impassable marshes. To the south, the steep, wooded slopes of the Vihen Hills. The Romans marched in peace, believing themselves to be moving through friendly territory. They had no scouts. They did not form a battle line. They were a parade, not an army. Then Arminius and his closest allies slipped away from the column, disappearing into the forest. The rain began to fall. It started with a few arrows from the tree line, then a volley of spears. The legionaries, unable to form their tight defensive squares in the narrow defile, scrambled to raise their shields. The Germans did not charge. They darted from the trees, threw their weapons, and vanished back into the fog. For the Romans, it was a nightmare they could not wake from. The column, stretched for miles, could not turn. It could not fight. It could only march forward, deeper into the trap. That night, the Romans built a fortified camp. They hoped the attacks would stop. They did not. The next day, as they tried to continue their march, the Germans struck again. The rain never stopped. The mud swallowed the men's feet. The wooden bows of the Roman archers swelled with moisture and snapped. Varus, a politician playing at war, watched his army bleed. On the third day, the column reached the narrow pass at Calchries. Here, the ground between the hill and the marsh narrowed to a bottleneck. And here, Arminius had built his masterpiece. A turf rampart, nearly 400 meters long, ran along the base of the hill, manned by thousands of Germanic warriors. As the Romans entered the pass, the Germans poured over the wall, descending from the high ground. There is a common myth that the late Roman army was weak, that its soldiers were unworthy of their predecessors. But the men of the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions were professionals. They were veterans of the Pannonian Wars. They fought for hours in the mud, hacking and dying, refusing to break. But there is a moment in every defeat when discipline collapses into primal terror, when the line breaks, when men throw away their shields and run. That moment came at Calchries. Seeing the slaughter, Varus knew his end had come. Rather than be captured and paraded through the streets of a German village, he fell on his sword. His officers followed him. The men who did not run were cut down where they stood. For 3 days, the bodies lay in the forest. The victors stripped the armor from the dead, folded the shield frames for transport, and looted the piles of coins the Romans had tried to bury before they died. In the end, nearly 20,000 Romans were dead. The eagles of the 3 legions were captured. The 17th, 18th, and 19th legions were erased from the Roman army list, never to be reformed. When the news reached Rome, Augustus was said to have paced the halls of his palace, beating his head against the door, crying out, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." But the disaster at Teutoburg was more than a military defeat. It was a psychological wound that would never fully heal. For years, Rome would try to avenge the loss. Germanicus, the nephew of the new emperor Tiberius, led massive expeditions across the Rhine, fighting Arminius to a draw at the Battle of the Weser River, and recovering 2 of the 3 lost eagles. But he could never fully defeat the Cheruscan chieftain. And when Emperor Tiberius finally recalled Germanicus, he made a fateful decision. Rome would never again try to conquer Germania east of the Rhine. The frontier was fixed. The river became a wall. Arminius, the man who had destroyed a Roman army, did not live to enjoy his victory. Within a few years, his dream of a united Germanic kingdom fell apart. Rival chieftains, jealous of his power and fearful of his ambition, conspired against him. In 21 AD, Arminius was assassinated by his own relatives. But the legacy of his victory echoed down through the centuries. By stopping Rome at the Rhine, he ensured that the Germanic peoples east of the river would develop outside the orbit of Roman civilization. Their languages, their laws, their cultures would remain distinct. And in the centuries to come, as the Roman Empire crumbled, it would be these peoples, the ancestors of the Franks, the Saxons, the Alemanni, who would pour across the frontier to reshape Europe. Was the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest the moment Rome began to fall, or was it simply the moment it learned the limits of its power? The moment it discovered that there were some lands it could never conquer, some peoples it could never break. The forest claimed 3 legions that day, but it also claimed the dream of a universal empire. And when Augustus cried out for his lost legions, he was crying for more than men. He was crying for the end of Roman invincibility, and it would never return.